Old fool. That's what I heard my own son call my daughter-in-law while having coffee at my table, in my house built with the sweat of 50 years of hard work. They were whispering, thinking I couldn't hear properly because of my age. But this old man still has good ears, you know. And a heart. Oh, the heart was shattered that Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen preparing a hearty breakfast, as I did every morning since my Martha passed away. I had just taken some biscuits out of the oven, her recipe, when I heard the muffled laughter. I approached slowly, with the tray in my trembling hands, and that's when I heard my August tell Marilyn that the old man's losing it anyway, and that they just needed to wait a little longer to take control of everything. The land, the cattle, the house, everything I built with so much sacrifice. I stood there, feeling the smell of fresh biscuits mix with the bitter taste of betrayal. My name is Oliver Peterson. I'm 78 years old, a retired psychologist, but I still see some long-time patients here in Billings, Montana. I came from a small town in Pennsylvania, but life brought me to this prairie more than 40 years ago, when the West was still the new agricultural frontier. I started small with a modest office and a few acres of land that I bought little by little. I've studied the human mind my whole life, but I confess I never quite understood greed. I worked double shifts my entire life, days at the office, helping people with problems, listening to pain, helping heal wounds you can't even see. Nights and weekends, tending to the land, learning about planting, harvesting, and ranching. While my fellow psychologists traveled on vacations, I was investing every penny in another piece of land. When I could have retired, I kept working to provide education for my only son. Expensive college in Boston, apartment, car, everything so he wouldn't go through what I did. And then came the wedding. The daughter-in-law, the grandkids. I always thought I was building a legacy, you know? Something to leave for the family when I passed. Little did I know I was feeding snakes in my own nest. Before continuing this story, I'd like to thank the Grandpa's Voice channel for allowing me to tell my story. And I ask you who are watching to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, comment where you're watching from and what time it is there, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Every day there's a new story here on Grandpa's Voice. These are stories like mine from people who have lived a lot and have something to teach. Well, on that day of the old fool comment, as I held the breakfast tray, I made a decision that would change everything. I placed the tray on the table as if nothing had happened. I smiled and began to devise my plan. After all, it's not because the hair turned white that the brain stopped working. I was born in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in 1947. My father was a small farmer who grew a little bit of everything and sold it at the town market. Mother was a school teacher at the elementary school, one of those who taught all subjects. I grew up between the farm and books, learning early on that knowledge and land are the only possessions no one can take from you. We were poor, but there was never a lack of food on the table or stories at bedtime. I was always curious about people's behavior. While other boys wanted to be ranchers or football players, I observed how Mr. Jenkins at the store treated customers differently depending on his mood, or how Mrs. Wilson changed her voice when talking about her husband who drank. My mother said I had a gift for reading others. It was she who put in my head the idea of studying psychology, even in a time when that was something for rich people from the city. I studied like crazy. I did high school in Gettysburg. Then I convinced my parents to let me live with an uncle in Philadelphia to finish my education. I worked days at a stationery store near the bus station and studied at night. I was accepted to Penn State at 20, the first person in my family to enter a state university. I graduated in psychology in 1972, already married to my Martha, whom I met in the college hallways. She was studying social work. I worked a few years in Philadelphia, but the dream of having my own piece of land never left me. In 1982, after much research, we decided to move to Billings, Montana. The region was growing, needed professionals, and the land was still relatively cheap for someone wanting to start from scratch. I set up a simple office downtown. At first, I treated everything: children with learning difficulties, couples in crisis, ranch hands with depression because the harvest had been poor. I was one of the first psychologists in the region, so I quickly became known. I worked Monday through Saturday from 8 in the morning until 9 at night. Martha helped me with the schedule and finances. Every penny left over went to the bank. In 1985, we bought our first 25 acres, 20 miles from town. It was somewhat abandoned land, with dirty pasture and a shack that looked more like a tin ranch. On weekends, we would go there. I learned from neighbors about cattle raising and soybean planting. Martha took our little son, August, who had just turned 5. She complained sometimes that I worked too much, that we needed to enjoy life more. But I always said, "I'm building our future, woman." Our marriage wasn't a bed of roses like none are. Martha wanted to return to Pennsylvania. Sometimes she missed her family. I, stubborn as a mule, said our place was here, that we were building something important. We had our fights, our periods of silence, but in the end, we always understood each other. She was the calm to my storm, you know. She understood me like no one else. It was she who suggested I get a specialization in rural psychology to work better with patients in the region. It was also she who convinced me to hire a foreman when the ranch started to grow, so I wouldn't work myself to death. August was our only child. Martha had 2 miscarriages before him and 1 after, so the boy grew up being the center of our lives. Perhaps that was my mistake, wanting to compensate with material things for the time I didn't spend with him. When he turned 15, we sent him to study in Bozeman at a good boarding school. Then came college in Boston, business administration, because he said he wanted to take care of the family business. We paid for his apartment, car, vacation trips. Everything I didn't have, I wanted to give to my son. During this time, the ranch grew. We bought more land from neighbors who were giving up. We modernized cattle raising, expanded the soybean planting area. I hired agronomists, veterinarians, agricultural technicians. I learned about futures markets, exports, herd tracking. Psychology remained my main profession, but the ranch was already giving a considerable return. We built a good house on the property and another in town. Martha could finally have the comfort she deserved. When August returned from Boston, already graduated with Marilyn as his fiancée, I thought my sacrifices had been worth it. He said he wanted to learn everything about the business, that he had new ideas, that he was going to expand even more what we started. We built a house for them on the ranch, not too far from ours. We gave them a good piece of land as a wedding present. Then came the grandchildren, Peter and Mary, and it seemed like everything was in the right place. But then I started noticing small changes. August questioned my decisions in front of employees. Marilyn commented, as if casually, that their house was smaller than ours, that their car was old, that their friends had more. When Martha fell ill in 2020, they rarely showed up at the hospital. They said the children couldn't see their grandmother that way, that they had unavoidable commitments at the ranch. I went back and forth alone day after day, watching my life companion wither away with a cancer that showed no mercy. After Martha passed in 2021, their greed became more blatant. They started talking about reorganizing the assets, modernizing management, thinking about the family's future. August wanted me to put everything in his name. He said it was to avoid problems with probate. Later, I even understood the logic, but something inside me, some instinct I developed after decades of analyzing behavior, told me to be careful. And that instinct was right, as I discovered that morning over coffee. The signs were right in front of me, but I refused to see them. As a psychologist, I always told my patients about denial, this mechanism we create to avoid facing painful truths. But when it comes to your own family, even the specialist becomes a layman. Everything became more evident after Christmas 2022, the first after Martha was gone. I organized a lavish dinner at the big house on the ranch, as she liked to do. I invited all the older employees with their families, ordered presents for the grandchildren, even hired a decorator from Billings to make everything beautiful. I wanted to keep the traditions alive, you know. It was a way to feel that Martha was still with us. August and Marilyn arrived late in a bad mood. He complained about the unnecessary expense. She criticized the decoration, saying it was old-fashioned. My grandchildren, Peter and Mary, then 15 and 13, were more entertained with their cell phones than talking to their grandfather. During dinner, I noticed August whispering with George, our financial manager. The next day, George came to ask me if I had authorized my son to do a complete survey of all properties and investments. I hadn't. Mr. Oliver, with all due respect, Doctor, August has been asking many questions about the land documents, about the bank accounts. He even wanted to know about your will. It was like a punch to the stomach. George had worked with me for over 20 years, was almost family. If he was concerned enough to come talk to me, the matter was serious. And what did you tell him, George? That only you could deal with these matters, Mr. Oliver. But he insisted, said you're too old to be taking care of so many things, that I should trust him because soon he would be the boss. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going over in my head all the moments of the past few months. How August had suggested I sell some cattle to simplify operations. How Marilyn kept insisting I should put the townhouse in their name to make it easier when it needs to be sold. How the two had tried to convince me to sign a power of attorney in case you get sick, Dad. They were pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to put together. For a few months, I observed, gathering more pieces. I saw how they treated employees differently when they thought I wasn't around, with arrogance, as if they were already the owners of everything. I noticed that August had bought a new, very expensive car without mentioning where the money had come from. I discovered that Marilyn was renovating their house, adding a pool, sauna, things we had never discussed. One afternoon in March of this year, I went to the bank in Billings and asked for a detailed statement of all my accounts. The manager, Mr. Clovis, who had been handling my finances for years, looked at me strangely. Dr. Oliver, I thought you were already aware. Your son was here last week with a power of attorney. My heart froze. What power of attorney, Clovis? He pulled out a folder and showed me the document. It was a power of attorney with my signature, giving full powers to August to move all my accounts and assets. Except I had never signed that. This is a forgery, Clovis. I never signed this thing. Poor Clovis turned white as paper. He explained that August had transferred a considerable amount to his personal account the day before. We blocked everything immediately, and I filed a police report that same afternoon. I returned to the ranch devastated, but determined to confront my son. When I arrived, I found Marilyn in the headquarters office, rummaging through the files where we keep all the deeds and documents. She jumped when she saw me. Oh, Mr. Oliver, what a scare. I was just looking for that old family photo to make a surprise frame for August. A blatant lie. The photos were always kept in the living room cabinet, not in the office safe. I didn't say anything, just nodded and left. I needed to think before acting. That night I called August to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed where I had so often told him stories when he was little. Son, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. He became restless, fiddling with the expensive watch on his wrist. What is it, Dad? I'm in a hurry. I have a video conference in 10 minutes. You went to the bank last week with a power of attorney from me. His face turned red, then white. I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. It had always been a sign he was lying since childhood. What are you talking about? Of course not. Who told you that? Clovis at the bank showed me the document today. It had my forged signature. He changed tactics immediately. Oh, that, yes, I went, but it was a misunderstanding. Remember those papers I brought you to sign last month about soybean exports? I think I mixed up the documents accidentally, and you ended up signing the power of attorney along with them. But it's not a problem. It was just to make things easier for you, Dad. You've been so tired. The lie came so easily from his mouth that it made me sick. That wasn't the boy I raised. It was a stranger with my son's face. August, I filed a police report today for forgery and attempted fraud. He jumped up, his face contorted with anger. You did what? Have you gone completely crazy, old man? Against your own son? Against a criminal who, as it happens, was born of my blood? That's when he exploded, started shouting, calling me senile, ungrateful, trash. He said I had never been a good father, that I had spent my entire life more concerned with the damned ranch than with him, that it was my obligation to pass everything to him now, that I had lived long enough. You think we can stand living in this prison? Working in this middle of nowhere while you control every penny? The ranch should be mine. This land should be mine. You don't even know how to manage it properly anymore, you stubborn old man. Marilyn appeared at the door, attracted by the shouting. Instead of calming her husband, she joined him. "You'd better cooperate, Mr. Oliver. We just want what's fair. August has been working on this ranch for years. He deserves recognition. You won't live forever. And we need to secure our children's future." I sat listening to everything. Each word was like a knife stuck in my chest. When they finally stopped, exhausted from so much shouting, I spoke with a calmness I didn't know I had. "We'll talk tomorrow. Now get out of my room." They left, slamming the door hard. I spent the night awake, recalling every sacrifice I had made for that ungrateful son. The overtime at the office to pay for private school, the lost weekends working to be able to send money for college, the sweat shed on every acre of that land that he now wanted to take by force. The next morning, I went down for breakfast earlier than usual. I found the two of them whispering at the kitchen table, so engrossed they didn't see me coming. That's when I heard that phrase that opened this story. "The old man's losing it anyway. Just wait a little longer." I stood in the doorway with the tray in my hands, feeling the weight of each word. I took a deep breath, entered the kitchen as if nothing had happened, and served them coffee. We ate in silence. When they finished, August said he was going to town to take care of some business and would be back at night. Marilyn was going to take the kids to school and then meet her friends at the mall in Billings. As soon as I was alone, I called my lawyer, Mr. Mendez. I didn't tell all the details over the phone, just asked him to come urgently to the ranch. 2 hours later, he was sitting in my office listening to everything, the forgery, the threats, their plan to take my lands. "Mr." Mendez took off his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief, as he always did when thinking seriously. "Mr. Oliver, forgive my frankness, but you are in danger, not just financially, but perhaps even physically. What your son did is a crime, and from what you tell me, he doesn't seem sorry, on the contrary. What do you suggest, counselor? First, change all the locks. Second, update your will immediately, excluding your son if that's your wish. Third, hire private security until we resolve this situation. And fourth, perhaps the most difficult, you need to distance yourself from them." I felt a lump in my throat. Distance myself from my only son, my grandchildren, from the life I had built on that ranch. But deep down I knew Mr. Mendez was right. It was no longer safe to stay there. "There's one more thing," he continued. "Have you thought about what you want to do with your assets? Who will be your heirs now? I hadn't thought about that yet. My entire life I had worked thinking of leaving everything to August and the grandchildren. Now I needed to rethink everything." "I need a few days to decide that, counselor." He nodded understandingly. "Take the time you need, but don't delay too long. The situation is serious." When the lawyer left, I sat in the office for hours, looking at the horizon through the window. I watched the sun begin to set over the fields of soybeans that I myself had planted. I saw the cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures that I had cleared with my own hands. A lifetime of work that was now turning into a family battlefield. That night, I didn't sleep at home. I took some clothes, important documents, and went to my house in town. The next morning, when August called furiously asking where I was, I just said I needed time to think. "Think about what, Dad? How you're going to keep controlling our lives?" "No, son, about how to protect myself from you." I hung up the phone and blocked his number. It was time to make difficult decisions, to change the course of my story, and mainly, to do justice. During the 3 days I spent alone in the townhouse, I received dozens of calls from August and Marilyn. I didn't answer any. I needed this time to organize my thoughts and, mainly, to discover how far their betrayal went. On Wednesday, I received a visit from Mr. Jack, the ranch's oldest foreman. A simple man of few words who had worked with me since the early days. He arrived hat in hand, embarrassed. "Mr. Oliver, excuse me for coming without warning, but I thought you needed to know." I served him coffee and we sat on the porch. Jack then told me that in my absence, August had gathered all the employees and announced that from that moment on, he was taking command of everything. He said I was mentally incapacitated and that he had documents proving it. "What documents, Jack?" "Don't rightly know, boss, but he showed some papers with a doctor's letterhead saying you got, what's the name again? Alzheimer's." "Alzheimer's," I corrected, feeling a chill down my spine. "That's it. said you're sick and can't make decisions no more, that the court already gave him the right to take care of everything. Forgery again. My own son forging medical reports to declare me incompetent. How far had we come? And did the staff believe it, Jack? The old foreman twisted his hat in his hands, uncomfortable. The newer ones who don't know you well might have, but us old-timers, we'd never believe a story like that. You may have white hair, but your mind works better than many young folks around. Those words warmed my heart. At least I still had allies. There's one more thing, Mr. Oliver. Doctor. August ordered George to prepare some papers to sell part of the cattle. Said he needs money fast. This confirmed my suspicions. They wanted to liquidate my assets as quickly as possible, probably to flee with the money before I could react. Thank you for coming to tell me this, Jack. It means a lot to me. You gave me a chance when nobody else would, Mr. Oliver. Taught me how to handle cattle. Trusted me to be foreman, even though I was just an uneducated ranch hand. I'll never forget that. After Jack left, I immediately called Mr. Mendez and told him the news. He was alarmed. Mr. Oliver, this is very serious. Falsification of medical reports is a serious crime, and if he's announcing he has a judicial guardianship, that's also ideological falsity. We need to act quickly. What do you suggest? First, let's request a precautionary measure to prevent any sale of assets. Second, you need to undergo an official medical evaluation with experts appointed by the court to prove you are in full possession of your mental faculties. Third, we'll file another police report for these new forgeries. I agreed with everything, but as I hung up the phone, I realized I needed more than legal measures. I needed to regain control of the situation. It was at that moment that I remembered my former patient, Colonel Damasceno. He had been the chief of police in Billings before retiring and still maintained many contacts. In the last years of his career, I had helped him overcome a severe case of depression after his wife's death. Since then, he always said he owed me one. I called the colonel and scheduled coffee for that same afternoon. When we met at the downtown bakery, I told the whole story. He listened in silence, his face becoming increasingly serious. Oliver, what your son is doing is criminal and dangerous. If he has already forged documents twice, he can do worse things. You are not safe. What do you suggest, Colonel? I have some active friends who can give special attention to your case, and I know a trustworthy security company with discreet and efficient professionals. Before we even left the bakery, the colonel had already made some calls. The next morning, I had 2 professional security guards accompanying me, and the guarantee that the police would make regular rounds at my townhouse and the ranch. But the real trump card came from where I least expected: technology. About 2 years ago, after some thieves had stolen cattle from a neighboring ranch, I installed security cameras throughout the property. Modern cameras, with remote access via cell phone. In the rush to leave the ranch, I had completely forgotten about them. But now, alone at home, I remembered I could see everything happening there through my smartphone screen. I began to monitor August and Marilyn's movements. I saw when they took an unknown man to tour the ranch, probably a buyer interested in the land. I observed when Marilyn entered my room and began to rummage through drawers, probably looking for more documents. I caught a heated discussion between August and George in the office, where my son seemed to be threatening the financial manager. Most importantly, I recorded everything. Every indiscreet conversation near the cameras, every suspicious action. In one of these moments, I captured something precious. August speaking openly with Marilyn about the falsification of medical reports. Relax, honey. Nobody's going to question these reports. I paid a fortune for Dr. Richard to sign them. He's respected in town. Nobody will doubt it. But what if your father shows up around here healthy? People will see he doesn't have anything wrong with him. By then we'll have sold enough to secure our future, and if he causes problems, well, accidents happen, especially to confused elderly people. That last phrase chilled my spine. My own son considering the possibility of harming me. I saved the video and sent it immediately to Mr. Mendez and Colonel Damasceno. The response was swift. The next day, police officers went to the ranch with a search and seizure warrant. They found the falsified reports in August's office, along with other adulterated documents, including a fake will where I supposedly left everything to him. My son was taken to give a statement, and Marilyn panicked. She called me crying, saying it had all been August's idea, that she had only agreed out of fear, that she was sorry. I didn't believe a word. The cameras had shown she was as active in the scheme as my son. With the evidence in hand, Mr. Mendez filed a lawsuit requesting protective measures against August and Marilyn. Judge Dr. Paul Resende was an old acquaintance of mine. Our sons had studied together. He analyzed the case with priority and in less than a week granted all our requests. August was indicted for document forgery, fraud, attempted embezzlement and threats. Marilyn as an accomplice. Both were prohibited from approaching me or the ranch, and all attempts to sell or transfer assets were nullified. Dr. Richard, the doctor who had signed the false reports, was also indicted and had his professional license suspended. Later, I discovered he had gambling problems and owed money to many people in Billings. August had taken advantage of this weakness. With the judicial situation underway, it was time to resolve the inheritance issue. I called Mr. Mendez and we redid my will. I decided that 30% of the assets would go to a foundation I created in Martha's name, intended to support low-income students in the region who wanted to attend college. Another 30% would be divided among my oldest employees, like Jack and George, who had been loyal for so many years. The remaining 40% would go into a trust fund for my grandchildren, Peter and Mary. But with a condition. They could only access the money after turning 30, and only if they proved they were working and having a productive life. August and Marilyn were completely disinherited. The decision was difficult but necessary. As a psychologist, I know that easy money only feeds vices and bad conduct. It would be irresponsible on my part to reward their dishonesty. A week after all this, I returned to the ranch, changed all the locks as Mr. Mendez had suggested and reinforced the security system. August and Marilyn had to leave their house on the property. After all, the property was in my name, and they were prohibited from approaching. They went to live in a rented apartment in Billings. The reunion with the employees was emotional. Many came to hug me, to say they were happy with my return. Jack even organized a barbecue to celebrate. During the party, he approached with a beer in hand. "Mr. Oliver, can I ask a somewhat bold question?" "Of course, Jack." "How did you manage to turn the tables like that? Dr. August seemed so confident he was going to take over everything." I smiled, remembering all the technologies I had implemented on the ranch over the years, always facing resistance from my son, who thought it unnecessary to spend money on these modern gadgets. "Jack, I think my son forgot one important thing. It's not because we get old that we stop learning. While he was busy counting my money, I was learning to use technology to my advantage." The old foreman's eyes shone with admiration. "You really are a different kind of boss, Mr. Oliver, a man of vision." That night, sitting on the porch of the big house looking at the starry sky of the prairie, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. So I had lost my son, and that hurt like an open wound. But I had saved a lifetime of work, and more importantly, I had preserved my dignity. Weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was Mary, my 13-year-old granddaughter. "Grandpa, can I talk to you?" Her voice was trembling, unsure. We arranged to meet at an ice cream parlor in Billings, neutral ground. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a corner table, nervously fiddling with the straw in her milkshake. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hi, my flower, good to see you." She remained silent for a while, then let it all out at once. "Grandpa, Peter and I are very sad about all this. We didn't know what Dad and Mum were doing, I swear. We just heard them saying you didn't want to divide the ranch, that you were selfish. But then I saw in the newspaper that they forged documents, that they were going to sell everything without you knowing." Tears were streaming down her face. I reached across the table and held her hand. "I know you're not to blame, my flower. You're still children. You couldn't do anything. Peter is very angry with Dad, doesn't even want to talk to him. And I miss you, Grandpa. I miss the ranch, riding horses with you, hearing your stories." My heart tightened. The grandchildren were innocent in this whole story. They couldn't pay for their parents' mistakes. "Mary, I want you and your brother to know something. The ranch will always be your home too. When you want to visit me, just arrange it. I'll send the driver to pick you up from school, take you to lunch, spend a weekend at the ranch, whatever you want." Her face lit up. "Really, Grandpa? You're not mad at us?" "Of course not, my flower. You are my grandchildren, blood of my blood. No one can change that." When we said goodbye, Mary hugged me tightly, as she hadn't done in a long time. That hug was worth more than all the land and all the cattle in the world. In the following months, Peter and Mary began to visit me regularly. First just on Saturdays, then on some holidays, eventually spending entire vacations at the ranch. August and Marilyn didn't like it, but with the protective measures in effect, they couldn't do much about it. The criminal case against them followed its course. They ended up making a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for a lighter sentence, they returned the money they had diverted and confessed to all crimes. August got 2 years in a semi-open regime, converted to community service and wearing an ankle monitor. Marilyn, as an accomplice and not the main perpetrator, got 1 year, also converted to alternative penalties. The story spread throughout Billings and the region. Many people came to see me, some out of morbid curiosity, others out of genuine concern. I even became the subject of a report in the local newspaper. 78-year-old psychologist foils own son's scheme and saves assets. But what struck me most was the reaction of other elderly people in the community. Many began to seek me out, asking for advice on how to protect themselves, how to deal with greedy children, how to ensure their wishes were respected at the end of life. I ended up creating a support group that meets every Thursday at the Billings Chamber of Commerce. We call it Silver Wisdom, a play on our grey hair. In the end, that old fool that my son so despised ended up becoming a reference for a whole generation of elderly people who don't want to be taken advantage of, and that, to me, is worth more than all the assets I built throughout my life. It's been almost a year since that breakfast where I heard my son call me an old fool. A year of many changes, pains, and discoveries. If there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that time doesn't stop, not even to heal wounds. It simply passes. And it's up to us to decide what to do with the scars that remain. The first weeks after everything were the most difficult. Even with the protective measures and all the legal apparatus defending me, the pain of betrayal was still there, like a stone in the middle of my chest. Every night I would look at Martha's portrait on the bedside table and silently ask, "Where did I go wrong, woman? What kind of son did we raise?" And the silence that came as a response only made the wound hurt more. But we are like the very land I cultivated all my life. After the storm, there's always time to replant, to start over, and that's what I did. First, I reorganized the ranch. With August and Marilyn banned from the property, I needed to rethink the entire administration. I promoted George to general manager and gave more responsibilities to Jack. I hired a young woman with a degree in agronomy, Deborah, to further modernize our production. Under her guidance, we expanded irrigation and began to invest in regenerative agriculture. These modern techniques that respect the environment more and still increase productivity. The results didn't take long to appear. This year's soybean harvest broke all previous records, and the cattle raising is healthier than ever. As my father used to say, good land returns double the care it receives. It has been so with the ranch. As for my grandchildren, Peter and Mary, our relationship has only improved with time. At first, August and Marilyn tried to prevent their visits, but with Mr. Mendez's help, we managed to establish a regular visitation schedule. Now they spend 1 weekend a month with me at the ranch, plus part of their school vacations. It's an enormous comfort to be able to pass on to them the values I learned from my parents. Love for the land, respect for work, honesty in relationships. Peter, who is already 16, shows a genuine interest in psychology. Sometimes he sits with me in the late afternoon and asks me questions about the profession, about how it is to help people understand their own minds. As for Mary, at 14, she has become enchanted with animal care. She loves to accompany Jack in the routine with the cattle and is even thinking about studying veterinary medicine in the future. Seeing them growing like this, absorbing the best I can offer, is a balm for my wounded heart. With August, the situation is more complicated. After serving his sentence, he tried several times to re-establish contact, sent letters, then emails. Eventually, he even appeared at the door of the townhouse, always respecting the distance determined by the court. At first, I ignored all attempts. The hurt was still too raw, but about 3 months ago, after much reflection and some sessions with a fellow psychologist, yes, even we psychologists need help sometimes, I decided to respond to one of his letters. It wasn't easy. I spent hours writing, tearing up the paper, starting over. In the end, I sent just a short note. August, I'm not ready to forgive what you did yet. Maybe I never will be, but I'm willing to hear what you have to say, not as father and son, but as two adult men who share the same blood. If you want to talk, we can meet at Mr. Mendez's office next week. We met on a rainy Wednesday. August seemed smaller than I remembered, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes and some white hairs that weren't there before. The arrogance had given way to a downcast expression, almost humble. We talked for almost 2 hours with Mr. Mendez present as a witness and mediator. He asked for forgiveness, said he had been consumed by greed, by envy of friends who had inherited fortunes from their parents without having to work, said that Marilyn pressured him constantly, that they had debts I didn't know about, that he was desperate, told me that after everything she abandoned him, ran off with a businessman from Great Falls, leaving him alone with the guilt and shame. I didn't feel joy at his suffering. In fact, I felt a mixture of pity and frustration. As a psychologist, I understand the mechanisms that lead someone to make destructive decisions. As a father, I wonder where I failed in the education I gave him. Maybe it was that absence during his formative years when I worked so much. Maybe it was too many spoils afterward, trying to compensate, or simply the choices he himself made as an adult, probably a bit of all that. At the end of the meeting, I told him I needed more time, that forgiveness, if it came, would be a slow process, but that I didn't completely close the door to a reconciliation in the future, especially because of Peter and Mary, who deserve to have a family, even if patched up by scars. Since then, we have exchanged occasional emails, nothing deep, just updates about daily life, about health, about the kids. It's a beginning, a thin thread that may, with time and care, transform into something stronger. Or not, time will tell. As for me, I discovered a new vocation at this stage of life. With the story of the betrayal circulating in the region, many elderly people began to approach me at the supermarket, at church, even at the office where I still see some old patients. All with similar stories. Children who pressure for advanced inheritance, daughters-in-law and sons-in-law who treat them like nuisances, the fear of ending up abandoned or deceived. I began to organize weekly meetings at the Ranchers Association. We call it Wisdom Afternoon, a space where people over 60 can exchange experiences, learn about their rights, receive legal and psychological guidance. What started with half a dozen acquaintances now gathers more than 50 people every Thursday. We even have a lawyer and a social worker who volunteer to give talks. This experience has been transformative for me, realizing that my story, even with all the pain it carries, can help other people protect themselves and live with more dignity, gives new meaning to everything I've been through. As I always say in our meetings, it's not because the hair turned white that the voice went silent. On the contrary, now we have more stories to tell, more wisdom to share. Life has taught me that no one is immune to disappointments, not even from those we love most. But it has also shown me that we can always start over, reinvent our days, find new purposes. At 78, when many think it's time to rest and wait for time to pass, I feel like I'm starting a new chapter. A chapter where I'm not just the ranch owner or August's father, but Oliver, a man who fell, got up, and now extends his hand to help others get up too. If I could leave one piece of advice for those listening to me, it would be this: value your independence at any age. Maintain control over what is yours. Be transparent in family business, but don't give up your decision-making power. And, mainly, don't let yourself be convinced that because you're older you're worth less or no less. The experience we carry is our greatest asset. No one can take that from us. Today, when I look out the window of my office and see the soybean fields extending to the horizon, the cattle grazing peacefully, I feel a peace I thought I would never have again. It's not the same happiness as before, That died along with the trust I had in my son. It's a more mature happiness, more aware of the fragilities of life and relationships, a happiness that doesn't depend on expectations about others, but on what I myself build each day. And you know what's most ironic in all this? That old fool they despised ended up becoming a reference for an entire community of elderly people, ended up showing that experience and knowledge are worth more than the strength of youth, ended up proving that, as we say here on the prairie, an old tree gives the best shade. If you've made it this far, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story. I hope it has touched you in some way, made you reflect on how we treat our elderly, on the value of wisdom that comes with age. I also want to thank the Grandpa's Voice channel for giving me this opportunity to open up and share my life. If you liked it, please subscribe to the channel, leave your like, comment below what city you're watching from and what time it is. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share this video. Every day there's a new story here, and who knows, the next one might be even more similar to yours. A tight hug from this old man who discovered that even in the darkest hours, it's still possible to find light.